Really interesting day in Australian politics. What we predicted happened did end up happening. The Labor Party lost its motion of no confidence against the recommissioned Rockcliffe government in Tasmania. And this election has dragged on for so long. There's just some satisfaction in the fact that it is now over. And I won't lie, it was a little bit satisfying watching the live feed of Parliament today and watching a series of speeches before the motion from members of the Liberal Party, members of the Greens, members of the Independent Crossbench, all unanimously putting forward their perspective on why the Tasmanian Labor Party is so fucking hopeless. Look, I've talked about Tasmanian politics more than enough, more than anyone ever should. So I'm not just going to focus on that. I'm also going to talk about national polling and where the trending is for Labor on a federal level, and appreciate actually some good news for the Labor Party somewhere in this country. But really quickly, just to summarise the lashing that the Labor Party got in Tasmania's parliament today. So, quick wind back. The Jeremy Rockcliffe government was recommissioned by the Premier, basically made the government again, because it was mandatory that the governor do that. Tasmania is fairly unique in that there is a legal requirement that the governor put a government in place 7 days after all the results are returned from the election. So she had to make somebody the government. And she picked Peter Rockcliffe. He had the largest number of seats in Parliament, and he was the acting Premier at the time, so it made sense. And in any other system, in any other state, it would have just been left to Parliament to find somebody to commission, and it would have been left up to them. And that really acted against Labor today. It would have been a very different proposition if there was currently no proper government in place and the parties had to vote for which side they supported. But in the Tasmanian system, Rockcliffe was made the governor, and then it was up to Labor to move a motion of no confidence in him if they wanted him removed. And that kind of gave a lot of the Greens and Independents sort of an out, in that they're not directly supporting Rockcliffe, they're just not supporting Labor's motion to remove him from office. And it was with that rationale that the Labor Party lost the crossbench on this vote. And I don't just mean they lost most of the crossbench, they lost the entire crossbench. When the Labor Party finally put forward this motion in Rockcliffe after quite a few speeches from various different members, the final vote tally of 34 voting members, the Speaker wasn't voting on this, the final count was 24-10 against Labor's motion. Every single member of the Tasmanian Parliament, other than the Labor MPs, voted against bringing down Rockcliffe's government. What an absolute failure on the part of the Labor Party. Not even one. Not one of the Greens, not even Craig Garland, the MP, who kind of looks like a homeless man and lives in a fisherman's shack. Like, literally not a single member of the 11 MPs on the crossbench moved with Labor on this motion. And as a result, this election is finally over, and the Liberal Party is in power for the time being. And look, a lot of MPs got a chance to speak on this, a lot of members of the crossbench during this sitting of Parliament, but I think Peter George put it best when he said that in all of his years of following and being engaged with politics since the 1970s during the Whitlam era, when looking at the Tasmanian Labor Party, he has never seen an opposition less ready to govern than what he's currently seeing from Dean Winter's Labor Party. So what's next for the Labor Party after this absolute fucking shambles of a political saga? Well, the leadership of the Tasmanian Labor Party after every election defeat is automatically declared vacant. So Dean Winter, if he wants to stay on as leader, is going to have to face a leadership election, not only against some member of his own party and with them voting, but he's also going to have to face the Labor membership. And they are going to be able to cast votes in this upcoming leadership election. So it remains to be seen if he stays in power. He's probably just stubborn enough to try and stick it out, but I would be quite shocked if he was able to convince the Labor Party to give him another shot at it. This will go down as one of the great case studies of how not to conduct politics and how not to shoot yourself in the foot consistently and destroy the reputation of yourself and your political party. But there is actually a silver lining here, and I think one of the Greens MPs that was speaking today actually put it quite well, which is that Tasmania, legislatively going ahead, is going to be controlled by a progressive legislature. The Greens, Labor, and independent MPs that are left-wing make up a majority of the seats in the House, which is still unbelievable. Labor still couldn't find a way to government through all of that. But anyway, there is a progressive majority in the House. And we have this very interesting situation, which I really haven't seen before. At least I can't think of a parallel example, where we kind of have a pseudo-presidential system of government in Tasmania at the moment. The Liberals were recommissioned by the governor without the legislature due to like a constitutional deadline, and the Liberals were put back into office. But the legislature is comprised majority of like ideological opposites. So it's almost like a situation where you have the president in like the American system who's elected, but then the legislature doesn't fully back him, which is very odd to think about, and will make this a very interesting term of government for the Tasmanian Liberals. They will have nothing near an ideological majority in the House, and I'll be interested to see how they actually manage to balance all of this going ahead. But anyway, that's enough of that depressing saga, and I want to move on to actual national politics and look at the state of polling at the moment, because I think it's important to drive home. First of all, I'm tired of talking about Tasmania. I think I've talked about it far too much over the course of the last month on this channel, but also because you need to understand how astoundingly well Labor is doing literally everywhere else in the country at the moment. So look, every political party has a honeymoon period after they win a federal election. People like winners. They think, okay, this guy's back in. Clearly he has the support, I'll back him. So there's like a small fraction of people that will come over and back a political party after an election win. And normally it starts to calm down after a while, after a couple of months. But we've seen some pretty interesting numbers at a federal level here in Australia. So what we've seen post-election for polling on the federal Labor Party and how they've compared to the coalition is that the Labor Party has been putting up numbers like 59 to 41. Like, that would be the biggest landslide in the history of Australian politics. Not just going back to World War II, going back to Federation. And we've seen some others like 57, 58, and then there was a bit of a calm down trend over the last month or so, and like News Poll started putting out numbers like 56, 44, so still up from their landslide election this year, but slowly ramping down as time is going on. But then Roy Morgan put out a poll recently which bucked the trend and went back up to 59-41. And look, the reason that Roy Morgan is interesting is because they were kind of the only pollster in this year's federal election that actually called it in terms of popular vote support, or I should say two-party preferred. They were the only pollster in the lead up to this election in 2025 at a federal level that said Labor is going to hit 55% of the two-party preferred vote. And they were kind of thrown off as like, look, that is just absolute, complete limit of margin of error. Just chuck it in the pile and average it out. But like, that is an outlier, and that is ridiculous. But like I said, Roy Morgan ended up being the only pollster that actually put out, within like 0.3%, an accurate projection for what the two-party preferred vote was going to be. It was very hard to find pollsters that were assuming that Labor would get upwards of 54% of the TPP in this year's federal election. But Roy Morgan called it. And let me preface this by saying we are so far away from the next federal election at this point. 2028 is looking like the most likely year it is going to happen at the end of this 3-year term. Probably won't get called early for any reason, barring a complete disaster. But I think it's important to look at polling now to get a sense for how much of a head start the Labor Party actually has and how completely out of touch the Liberals are with modern Australia at the moment. This latest Roy Morgan poll actually had breakdowns like state by state. So at a national level, they are projecting at the moment in terms of support between the two major parties on a two-party preferred basis. The Labour Party is at 59% nationally. Again, at an election would be the best result for any party since Federation. But on a state-by-state level, it's even more impressive. New South Wales, an improvement to 56.5. Victoria, an improvement to 57.5. WA, a slight decrease to 54.5. South Australia, an increase to 62% of the two-party preferred vote. Queensland, a 3-point swing. Labor is currently projected in Roy Morgan polling to win Queensland 53.5% of the two-party preferred vote going their way. And lucky old Tasmania at 61% for the Labor Party. So that is the Labor Party winning every state by historically solid margins. Some of them by the biggest margins the Labor Party would ever win there, ever. And I think that's really important to point out because I talk a lot of shit about the Liberals at the moment, and it's important to know that it's not just some sort of echo chamber here. The Liberal Party on a federal level fucking sucks. And everybody is aware of that. So to my several Tasmanian viewers, who I have seen in the comments, I appreciate you guys here. No matter how terrible state-level Labor is, I promise you, on a federal level, things are okay.